Mrs. Hub?
Yes, that is correct. She is not present as of yet.
Okay, and I apologize that I couldn't be there in person. I'll try to preside over Zoom. So I'll go ahead and get started. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Calling the meeting to order at 6:03. Present, do we have Trustee Dryden? Did I hear Ms. Dryden?
Yes, Ms. Dryden is present.
Trustee Sullivan?
Present.
Trustee Camby?
Present.
And Mrs. Hub is absent. Dr. Ramirez?
Present.
Ms. Peterson?
Present.
And Ms. Torres?
She is also present.
Okay. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have 4, 1 absent. All right, moving on. Do we have any public comments on closed session items?
No public comment.
Okay. So at this time, we are going to close for closed session. It's about 6:05, and we may be returning at about 6:30 p.m. Okay. Thank you. I'll go ahead and start. We adjourned from closed session at 6:53 and reconvene in public at 6:55. At this time, we'll go ahead and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's go ahead and stand up if you're not standing. Right hand over your heart, face the flag, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty with justice for all. Go ahead, can you close the door? All right. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
Make a motion to adopt the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Everybody's in favor?
We're not quite ready. Ms. Dryden asked a quick question.
Okay.
I think we're ready for the vote now.
Okay. All in favor?
Just letting her know my question was resolved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4 and no opposition. All right, is there an audience to address the Board of Trustees?
No, there is not.
Superintendent's report?
Okay, well, thank you, Mrs. Romero, and thank you to the board. Welcome. I'm just going to highlight just a few important updates since we last met. I always like to go back and just bring forward some important events, not at all an exhaustive list, but rather just some points or some highlights to be to keep in mind and to celebrate really amongst ourselves. So starting with learning and engagement, back in on the 21st, February 21st, we held our middle school family showcase. And this is something that we've been able to have now 2 years consecutively. The intent here, as it indicates on the slide, is to welcome to Mesa or to welcome anew, right, our families, as well as to help them transition or start getting some visibility into what the middle school program entails. And even with our returning families, it's always an opportunity to share with them some updates, some new pieces of information, but also to get them to meet the staff as well and experience a little bit of what learning at the middle school will look like. I think it's just important that we recommit to our families and help them in their transition. So it was really great to see a pretty good turnout. You know, we did have some additional guests and families who might be joining us this coming year, and that's a really helpful way to just build community anew and get the following year started early. So I'm very thankful, obviously, to Mrs. Dryden and Mrs. Romero, who are present, as well as to our middle school staff, who just not only participated but really supported by giving those snapshots and those views of what their particular area and content entails. I thought, for me, one of many highlights, but I'll share one, was the student panel. The student panel that shared, in their own words, the things that they have experienced. It was great to see the 8th graders in particular reflect on the last 3 years, which have not been easy for them, but nevertheless enjoyable in terms of the things they've gotten to participate in and the memories that they've made here at Mesa with those incoming families. I thought that was a nice touch. So anyhow, I just thought it was a really important event that I'm glad that we're able to make happen for a second year in a row. Next, I wanted to share, just in chronological order, the Tiger Cub Family Night. So that was on Thursday, February 23rd. Similarly situated, it's an event to welcome our incoming transitional kinder and kindergarten families. And similarly, an opportunity to meet teachers, to understand what efforts we're making to really personalize the learning for kids, to meet them where they are, and to accelerate their learning, to extend their learning as and their growth, just as people, as human beings, over the course of 2 years, right, for the kids that are joining us in TK. So there again, even with the families that have older children, it's an opportunity to see us anew and see us in perhaps a different light. So I was just very, very heartened to see that there was that participation on the teachers' behalf, because they really put their best foot forward to try to make it a warm event, an enjoyable event, and one that welcomes families and students alike. Particularly because some of these kiddos are meeting us for the very first time. So, and then lastly, the Read Across America Week. And this is just my highlight, to be quite honest with you, for the moment. Not that it's not everybody else's, but I just got to read to TKK. And I got to read a very, for me, a little story that was just my kids grew up with. And they haven't been TK aged or K age in a while now, but it was just a great opportunity to engage with the kids. And you know, even days later, they were still asking me about it. And the story, just for the record, is Nino Wrestles the World. So it's a story of a little boy who's a wrestler, and there's all of these characters that he wrestles. And it's a spin-off of the Mexican luchador concept. And so it was just a nice way of me sharing something that to me is very important and dear with kids, and connecting with them on a little story that they seem to get a lot of joy from. But of course, throughout the week, we had guest readers and parent volunteers come in and read to the kids. So just a nice celebration of community and literacy, of course. And just to conclude, on the learning and engagement piece, I just share with you the process. We're in the beginnings, the start of a new LCAP phase. We're heading into our year 3, which will be this coming year. It's year 3 of 3. Hard to believe, but it is. And at this point, we continue to try to elicit input from the community, input from kids. And I want to make a couple of highlights. First of all, the biggest one not biggest one, but one of the most important for me is the Parent Advisory Committee. That's still coming together, but in the past, we've had a very committed, small but committed, group of parents who share just a tremendous amount of input, personal stories, and really are grappling with how to serve the needs of all of our kids. And so I really want to thank them, and I'm reaching out to them to see if some of them would like to re-engage anew. The other one is Youth Truth Survey that's now ongoing. And with that, I just want to say that we just welcome candid and honest feedback from students, from families, from our staff. And so we're very happy to see that feedback is something that we all crave, and it just makes us better. And then lastly, our middle school student focus group has begun anew. They and I wanted to share something that Ms. Kuklinski brought to my attention, because she's been working with this team already, with this group of kids. And one of the first things, I'm just going to say, one of the first things they asked for was a reconfiguration of the cafeteria tables, which we acquiesced to this week. And so far, so good. I've been asking the kids how they feel about it, and it seems to be well received. They like the choice of sitting in a configuration that's similar to the way we've had it for the last couple of years, but also little things like chairs, like tables facing each other, where they can be with a larger circle of friend group. And it's not a difficult give. It's got its little challenges here and there, but on the whole, I've already seen that it's been very well received by all grade levels. So it's little things like that that I think hopefully allow our students to feel like their ideas, the things that matter to them, are being taken into account. And that's just a small example, but there's obviously more robust topics out there around rules and enforcement of different rules, or just their learning in general. So very heartened about that. As we move ahead, just a little statement and information around health and wellness. We know that spring break is upon us, and it is something where we will try to do our best to message that we do have, and it won't be Monday, January 9th. It'll be as of this week and next, that if parents need COVID tests at home, we do have them, and we've been making them available to everybody as they've asked for. So just want to continue to say that. On the attendance front, maybe you can go to the next slide. This continues to be an area of focus for all of us. And last month I mentioned a lot of the very specific efforts in which we have tried to communicate with our families, educate families about what attendance means and how we interpret attendance. It's still early, but in the month of February, we saw a little bit of an uptick in kinder. That was a nice little pleasant surprise. I think a lot of that, and first for that matter. So, our goal is to continue to trend forward, trend up. I know that we've experienced some challenges, and perhaps our routines need to be reshaped or reconsidered as a family, or in the home life, but also here at school. And our goal is to make sure that our seat time is used well, and I feel we are using it well, but obviously we need to continue to work with our families to stress the importance of daily attendance. It's always difficult to send what appears to be a mixed message, but I think the more that time goes on, the more we will be able to confidently say that daily attendance is really the best way to approach learning. So anyway, we've seen a slight uptick here in certain grade levels, and we're trying to really make that a trend, not just a blip. And then lastly, some upcoming events. Again, not an exhaustive list by any means, but just some events to consider. Mesa Challenge is slated for this Friday. It was rescheduled from last Friday. I know that had been messaged pretty abundantly in the lead up to March 10th, but rains were upon us, and we're going to try to give it a go this Friday. Hopefully it works. We've got spring break on the horizon. That'll be the 27th through the 7th. when we return to from spring break, we're going to be really kind of in that home stretch. We are looking to have, and we're pinning down the date for STEAM Presents. That's something that we're looking to move forward with in mid-April or early May. And as far as the Science Fair Awards are going to come up on March 21st. And lastly, in May, we have our CASP assessments that really, become a focal point for that entire month, especially the latter half. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude my superintendent's report, and certainly open to any comments or feedback from the board.
I had a question regarding attendance. I know last month we discussed there are a lot of meetings have been held with parents that had kids that were chronically absent. And so I'm just wondering if it's too early to tell how those meetings went, or if it's something we're tracking, on the daily basis. How are we continuing to communicate with those families? And then are we continuing to see if there's different students getting onto that chronic list, and are we following that same protocol?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great couple questions. So yes, the work of attendance is ongoing. And as the year goes on, unfortunately, just attendance accrues. Absences accrue. So the number of students who we may have to address or work with, or families we'd have to work with, unfortunately does grow. And that's just the natural cycle of things. But to come back to your question about the students who've expressed the most acute absenteeism, that is something that our front office, Ms. Kuplinski, has been working on a daily basis. And those become the kids that we center upon. In many instances, we've seen improvement, certainly from what was there in the past. But and there, in many instances, there are already follow-up meetings scheduled. Like they were scheduled when that meeting took place. There was already another date kind of on the horizon. One of the things that I'm working with our front office staff, and we meet every week, and one of the things that we've talked about is how do we systematize things? How do we, because we're a small collection of people, and whether it's letters going out that provide the information that parents need to have, or alerts, we're trying to use our systems to be able to automate those things, because it just helps everybody. But we've landed on moving forward mid-year attendance reports, as kind of a practice. And we are working with the county office to streamline the letters that need to be legally sent to families when they hit certain marks around attendance. We want to be able to put that on autopilot, if you will, so that there's no drop off of time. Time can get away with us pretty quickly, or get away from us pretty quickly. So there's things that we're trying to both automate, and then there are things that require face-to-face conversation. And those are also meetings. But on the whole, this is just something that will require ongoing attention.
Quick question. When does P3 start and end?
Miss Peterson, P2?
P2. P2 is considered the last full school month prior to April 15th. A school month constitutes 20 days. So let me tell you when the last day of attendance for MESA for P2 is this year. So just bear with me really quick.
While she's looking for that, I do want to mention that I did enjoy the showcase, the middle school showcase. I did enjoy it. I don't think that PFO said anything, or MEEF. I would have liked to have heard from them, but nevertheless, I did enjoy it. And perhaps you can let me borrow that book that you mentioned that you read.
P2 ends March 31st.
That's when it starts?
That's the last attendance day of P2.
April 1 is when P3 starts, is that correct?
There isn't a P3.
Where's ADA calculated from? Is it
P2.
P2?
P2. There's P1, which is the last full school month before December 31st. P2 is the last full school month before April 15th, and then annual is based on the full year. LCFF funding is based on P2. Lottery is based on annual.
And so all three calculations are obviously very important, but depending on the funding source, there's shifts about which calculation has more to bear. But P2 is very,
PS2 is the standard.
Yeah, it's a standard because of the timing of the. Mhm.
And it drives the bulk of our funding, such as mandated block grant. Many of the categoricals are calculated using P2 attendance.
Any other questions? And thank you, Mrs. Romero, for the kind words and the feedback. And yes, I'll take a look at that selection.
I just had a quick question with regards to the TK Kinder night. How did we communicate and invite those families? Some of them are already doing TK here, and so then they're rolling up. So they were easy to invite. How did we invite the other families that we either know about coming or had the potential to be in our district and come?
So we actually have a running spreadsheet that it's now 3 years old. And that has tabulated anybody who has submitted an interdistrict, who has expressed interest. Our front office has done great in just putting all that information there. We collect email addresses, phone numbers, whatever information we have. So the students that have already been, the families who've already been given acceptance of their interdistrict transfer, for example, or who have already enrolled, who are in district, they were provided that information at that point. The letter that Mrs. Torres has me sign and welcoming them includes that information about that event. Obviously, social media has been a huge piece of information for us. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook have been great sources of information. And lastly, our own Mesa Matters for our in-house families continues to be, a very important way to put that out there. So we have had multiple ways of communicating that particular event to our families. And so I don't know if I'm missing anything, Ms. Torres. Those are the primary ways in which we've been able to message with our families.
All right, anything further? All right, I'll move on to board members' reports and communications. Is there any correspondence by the board to share?
No, there isn't.
I do have a little bit of correspondence. I know the Ventura County Office of Education is going to release pretty soon applications for districts to fill out to nominate teachers for like a teacher of the year. And I saw the last time the last time a teacher that was here from Mesa got selected was in 1975. So I'm going to keep a lookout for that application. And I think that we have so many great teachers that it'll probably be difficult to select somebody, but I would be interested in nominating somebody. All right. Are there any board members' reports and communications? Nope. And board members' interest and concerns?
I have one. And in preparation for this meeting tonight, when I received the email, tonight's not, I understand why we met tonight, but I thought that we discussed in December that our regularly scheduled board meetings would be the third week, which would make it next Tuesday instead of tonight. And I understand why we need to meet tonight. And I was concerned about whether or not this meeting was properly noticed, and is this technically a special board meeting or not? But because it was listed in February's agenda that this would be the regularly scheduled meeting, I went back and looked at the minutes for the December meeting, the reorganization, and there was nothing in there that stated when our regular board meetings are. I don't know if there's a change in the law that says that we no longer have to choose a regular meeting night, or is that something that should be posted there? It is posted on the website. As I kept digging, there's also on the website, it says regular board meetings are the third Tuesday, beginning at 6 o'clock. But also still lists Dr. Canby as being the board president. We love you, Dr. Canby, but it's not fair to Ms. Romero, who is our board president. And so one of my concerns is where's the accurate information, and do we need to update the minutes from the December meeting, or do we need to pass a resolution as to when our meetings are?
Yeah, so I'd have to look back at our agenda, but I want to say that we regularly propose the calendar for the following year, including marking where there is what are the dates that happen.
Yeah, I feel there's a one pager that just has dates on it. And because March is different, and there's another, like, I don't know if it was December or another one, like after elections, that are certain dates that we have to meet in front of. And I feel like those are probably represented, but I think to his point, they should be readily available on the website. So that it's.
Well, it's on the website. I'm looking at it right now. But that's where the people, and that's where the people meet, are going to be notified. They would turn to our website to get that information, and they would expect that to be accurate. And so it's not accurate on our website. That's my concern. I understand what you're saying there, but we've neglected our website, and by this case, by more than a year.
All right, thank you. I have another comment if Mr. Sullivan is done. An interest that I have would be for us to consider maybe allocating 20 or 30 minutes to speak about how to use Measure O funds, because I know that it is a significant amount of money that would be used towards the improvement of Mesa. And I was hoping that perhaps next month, we not necessarily push back the meeting to an earlier start, but just maybe allocate 20 or 30 minutes during the agenda to talk about possibilities and how to use Measure O funds and start looking at ideas again, because I do think it's a significant amount of money, and I think that we should be as transparent as possible. So hopefully we can do that if the board is okay with it. And another interest that I have, I know that we've been somewhat promoting reading. I would like to promote it a little bit more, but perhaps also promote Spanish literature. I understand that we're not a dual immersion and we're not asking for that, but I think that for those that speak somewhat Spanish, I think that they should also be encouraged by the school to read Spanish literature and at their level. So that is an idea, and that's all I have for the moment.
If I may, I'd like to echo what you said about maybe dedicating some time about how Measure O money is spent. I would also, we talked last month about the possibility of altering, and we have the calendar set forth, but a time that we can have a special board meeting to talk about the annual goals so that we're prepared better to hit the ground running come September. And that might be something that could be agendized to have a special board meeting to discuss that. Likewise, I understand that you're saying that maybe just allocating some time on the agenda to discuss Measure O bond funds, but that may also be adequate or needful of a special board meeting so that we can discuss those things.
Yeah, and I think we can do both. I would like to discuss it during the regular agenda because I think that we would get a larger audience as opposed to a special board meeting because it's, probably not a convenient time for whoever is watching. So we can do both, but I do think that it is an important topic because there's a lot that we can do with those funds. Okay.
I just had a
Anything further?
follow-up question from last month. Has the CAO City Championship happened yet?
Yes.
I think it happened today.
Yes,
Or
the CAO, there, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but the award ceremony is on Thursday.
Were we able to put something in the program?
We were not. We were not.
Okay. Anything further? All right, moving on. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Everybody's in favor, I believe. All in favor, 4-0, and no opposition. Okay. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the 2022-2023 governance calendar? All right, I didn't hear anybody. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the 2022-2023 governance calendar?
Dr. Canby made the motion and I second.
All right. Any discussion?
Mrs. Romero, if I could, just a comment. I made just a few revisions based on prior conversation. Feel free to take a look. Obviously, this is the 22-23 year, but as part of the calendar revision later this school year, we'll be taking a more forward look at that calendar, bringing it into 23-24. Now, we know that the bulk of this particular calendar will roll, so there's that. But there's always an opportunity to, really highlight and make priorities known as we talk about some of those placeholders for future discussions, including, for example, the suggestion around Measure O bond, the bond program and Measure O bond funds.
All right, anything further? All in favor? Everybody's in favor?
The three people here said yes.
Okay, motion carries 4-0, no opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the governance team agreements? Is there a second?
I will second.
Any discussion?
This is also similar to what we discussed last.
Okay, anything further? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. No opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of the adoption of the second interim report for period ending in January 31, 2022?
I move that we adopt the certification of the 2021-2022 annual budget.
All right, and that just for the record, this also includes let's see, the presentation, the report, and the district certification of interim report. Is there a second?
I don't think you heard Dr. Camby say he seconded it.
All right, any discussion?
Just a point of clarification, we're talking about amending, the date should read January 31st, 2023.
2023?
Yes.
Okay. All righty. Okay. All in
Yeah,
favor?
And just as Tammy, if you can bring up the presentation, I just wanted to offer up a few points. One is, my gratitude for Tammy and BSA's being a great partner in the development of these important benchmarks around our budget. The second thing is our second interim really is a more accurate expression of where our budget is, both because it better captures our current school year with staffing being in place, expenditures really being underway, while still being close enough to this coming year. I want to invite the board to consider this year and next as being really the most of greatest value, although we do go 3 years current and the following 2. The other thing I'd like to say is that like anything else, we've been very intentional around the development of this particular budget. Tammy will speak to some of the assumptions made within it, but specifically, I wanted to say that we're in this position where we have to look at the gradual exhaustion of our one-time funds, federal and state, as well as potentially a few state funds coming into the fold. But really, it's about right-sizing our budget based on our current enrollment, our projected future enrollment, as well as the programs and the actions that we want to find the most value in, and the ones that we hold the most as the most important. And balancing a lot of those competing interests is challenging, but I really feel confident that we're doing a good job. And last point, as we talk about programs really are a bureaucratic way of saying it's the people. It's the people that run these programs that make it go or not. And we're very fortunate to have some very quality individuals who work here, who are committed to this community. But we want to be able to preserve those programs to the best of our abilities so that they continue to grow and put forward a good service for kids. So Tammy, I'll offer up some additional thoughts along the way, but for now, just go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Good evening, members of the governing board. Dr. Ramirez, I appreciate the opportunity to present this interim remotely. Due to the rain, I was able to make it home before it got too badly, or was bad. So thank you again. So if we can go to the next slide. As Dr. Ramirez mentioned, second interim really gives us a good look at where we are at in the current year as far as enrollment, what we anticipate next year as far as enrollment, and then really the third year is our best guess. Everything that we do around school business, we always look out into the future just to make sure that we have a solid plan in place. And as we look at MESA's enrollment at budget adoption, we were anticipating about 562 students in the current year, 575 in 23-24, and 24-25, 592 students. We have revised that downward based upon what our actual CalPADS, which is the first Wednesday of October, we take a count. And so this count of 549 represents only those students who are LCFF eligible as of the first Wednesday in October. So any of those TK students that we accepted into our program that were not LCFF eligible on that date would not be included in this number. So when we look to 23-24, we anticipate 565 students. As I mentioned, TK students that weren't eligible for LCFF were those students that were not 5 prior to February 2nd. Once they turn 5 after February 2nd, we can begin to count ADA, but only for those days between April and March, which, as I mentioned earlier, P2 ends March 31st. So we would only be able to count those few days if they turn 5 after February 2nd. Next year, that benchmark moves to April 2nd, and the following year into June, and then the following year will be fully funded for TK. That's all predicated that things continue that the state budget continues to fare well. As you may not heard, we are the state budget is about $5 billion below estimates at this point in time. And with the storm, some of the concerns around the budget are that tax collections won't be completed prior to the adoption of next year's budget. So that's creating a little bit of consternation for the governor as well as the legislature. And I'll speak more to that throughout the presentation. Our projected ADA at adopted budget was 533.9, 546.25 in 23-24, and 24-25, 562 students. When we adopted at first interim, we didn't have P1 data, so we still had fairly high assumptions for attendance, 521.55 in the current year, 536.75 in 23-24, and 535.8 in 24-25. P1 came in a lot lower than our traditional average. We normally, as a district, averaged anywhere from 94.5 upwards to 96 or 97. In preparing the budget, 95 we thought was a conservative estimate based upon historical information. But we're finding that students with COVID or with other illness, parents are more apt to keep students at home, and attendance really hasn't been a priority for some families after COVID. And it's not something that's just impacting Mesa, but it's impacting districts across the county. We're all seeing much lower percentage rates, and the budget, the estimates that I used in preparing this budget were 91% for the current year. And then by 24-25, we're hoping to recoup and I used a 92.6%, but that's still far below what we traditionally have had as a percentage as far as projected ADA. Next slide, please. Our unduplicated pupil count is actually a bit higher than it was at adopted budget. The district did a great job in collecting those free and reduced lunch applications, or actually they weren't applications because we're using universal meals. It's just a statement of income. And one of the concerns was because we are serving universal meals, which means all students eat for free, we were concerned that families would not be motivated to fill out those applications. And so for Mesa to actually exceeded our budget estimate, our adopted budget estimate, was great. And you can see how that impacts 23-24 and 24-25. Those supplemental dollars are compounded, and that really helps the district from a financial perspective in its LCFF funding. Next slide, please. Cost of living adjustment. When we adopted the budget, there was some talk about augmentation. It was a 6.58 COLA, I believe, and there was rumblings of a 6% augmentation. Because of the uncertainty surrounding that, we used a conservative estimate of 9.86%. It actually came in at 13.26%, which is the COLA plus augmentation. And then in 23-24, they were projecting a COLA of about 5.38%, and in 24-25, 4.02%. Currently, COLA, as of the governor's January budget, the governor's was estimating it to be 8.13%. The Legislative Analyst Office has responded, and their feeling is it should be much higher, probably closer to a 9% COLA. But one of the difficulties is that as we look at our current makeup of our legislature in both the Assembly and in the Senate, very few representatives remember and were part of the decision to move to an LCFF model. So their understanding of what COLA means and what LCFF means is difficult because they have there's not the buy-in. Governor Brown, excuse me, was very much tied to LCFF. That was his baby, and any additional dollars that the state received, any surpluses, he pushed to that full funding of LCFF. Governor Newsom is not as tied to LCFF, and because the legislature has no real memory of what LCFF even is or understanding of it, they're not tied to it as well. And so the concerns of creations of additional categorical programs in lieu of LCFF is a concern across the state. I attended the Small School District Association last week, and all small schools are very concerned that we won't even receive the full funding of COLA next year, just because the legislature feels, oh, we augmented last year. We don't really need to fully fund next year. So there's a lot of boots on the ground. Our advocacy groups, AXA, CASBO, Small School District Association are all doing their due diligence in educating legislators so that they understand how important COLA is to districts, not only from our ability to augment salaries and benefits for our staff, but also just because we're battling the consumer price index, increases in property insurance across the board. Schools are feeling the pressures of inflation. So that COLA is very, very important. It will be important for us to educate our communities and to really advocate for schools in order to receive that COLA. So as part of this interim assumption, we have used the governor's proposed 8.13%. And then in 24-25, he's proposing a 3.54% COLA. We were anticipating some cooling off of inflation, which is a big driver of COLA. But we just received some updates, and they just released data for February, and we're not seeing the decline in inflation as we had hoped, and this is what the Fed had hoped by raising interest rates. So it will be interesting over the next few months to actually see what COLA comes in at and what the May revised proposal brings for schools. Next slide, please. So when we look at that augmentation of the COLA, you can see it meant $265,000 more dollars for Mesa. Next year, with the COLA of 8.13%, it's an additional $285,000. And as we see the expiration of one-time dollars, having those additional dollars part of LCFF has been a huge help to the budget. But in 24-25, because of our conservative estimates, we're estimating the LCFF funding to be off by about $118,000. Next slide, please. Total revenue, when you look at where we were at adopted budget and where we're at today, currently, we have approximately 1.7 million more dollars. Many of those are sitting in categorical programs. Some of those we've not touched. We have the art, music, and instructional materials discretionary block grant, which Mesa is estimated to receive $355,000. That was part of the adopted budget, but part of the caveat of being able to spend those monies is to present and have a board approved plan. The plan was not released by the CDE until December. And in January, the governor is proposing now to take approximately a third of those dollars back. So we've been guided not to make plans for those monies, but to wait to see what actually happens in the adopted budget and whether or not the governor succeeds in convincing the legislature to pull those dollars back mid-year. Many said, well, you can't take monies back mid-year. But for those of us that were around in 2008, 2007 and 2008, we saw many mid-year cuts. And the mechanism that the state has in taking those monies back is through our monthly apportionment. So it's something that they can do. And we're just, in order to be prepared for that, we have not allocated any of those dollars, and we're holding those in reserve, waiting to see the outcome of the actual budget adoption for 23-24. Federal revenue is down slightly. We expended a few more dollars of the ESSER funds as we closed the books last year, so that's why that's down. Other state revenue is up 1.2 million, and of that includes the art, music, and instructional block grant that I just mentioned, as well as the learning recovery emergency block grant. We've been using some of those monies to help in the intervention program that MESA has, and we anticipate those dollars to last over the next 3 or 4 years, and we're working to help maximize their use. And then we also have the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, which we have hired additional classified staff. The requirements are that in the current year, we expend all of last year's carryover, and then in next year, we'll have to have expended all of $22-23. So we're working to make sure that we're able to do that. And then other local revenue is up. That's predominantly due to AB 602 pass-through dollars from the county, and that includes Mesa's portion as well as Golden Valley's. As you may recall, we passed that through. So we received Golden Valley's, and then we pass that on to them once they demonstrate its use. When we look at total expenditures, next slide, please. Certificated salaries are up 136,000. The bulk of that is as a result of the collective bargaining agreement, and then classified salaries are also up, and that's predominantly again due to the negotiated collective bargaining agreement, as well as additional classified staff that have been hired to support in the after-school program. Benefits are up in relationship to that. We're currently paying a little over 30 cents on the dollar for each classified staff member who's a member of PERS, and certificated is upwards or close, well, it's over 20% now. STRS is approximately 19%. That is the portion that the district contributes. Books and supplies, our estimates are down about $81,000 in the current budget, and services are up $264,000. And then other outgo is up $245,000. A portion of that is passed through to Golden Valley. And then also we're seeing that the excess costs that are paid to the county are up this year. Preschool students are costing about $63,000 for those students that are enrolled in the county program. They're extremely severe students. We wouldn't be able to serve them adequately in our programs, but that is an impact to the budget, especially when you consider preschool students were only receiving about $6,000 per student for special ed. So it's just a fact that it's something that MESA is experiencing, as well as all districts up and down the state, and even nationally. We see that encroachment on the unrestricted side for those that special needs. So all told, expenditures are up $1.3 million, or almost $1.4 million as compared to the adopted budget. Next slide, please. When we break down our unrestricted revenue in our multi-year projections, we're anticipating about $5.9 million in the current year, almost 6.1 in 23-24, and 6 million in 24-25. We anticipate state revenues, local revenues to remain somewhat static. We are seeing some increases in interest revenue because we do carry a high cash balance. So we're benefiting as a district from the higher interest rates, but we're uncertain how long those will last. And then our contributions in the current year are 481,000, and that's contributions to other restricted programs such as Title I, special ed, all of those programs that are on the other that are deemed categorical in nature. Next slide, please. When we look at certificated salaries at $2.7 million, and again, that's on the unrestricted side, we anticipate steps and columns to be about 2%. Those go up to 2.8, almost 2.9 million in 23-24, and in 24-25, another 2.9 million. We are moving some salaries that we're currently using categorical dollars for back to the unrestricted side in 23-24, and it will be dependent upon renewing of specific categorical programs, whether or not we'll move them back. But just to be on the safe side, we have moved those staff to the unrestricted side. Classified salaries, 851,000. Because of some of the reductions, that will drop to 836,000. And in 24-25, 844,000. Employee benefits are currently, STRS rates are anticipated to be static. We've not received CalPERS rates for next year, but have included an increase in our assumptions. And then books and supplies have been increased by CPI, as have services and other operating expenditures. We're hoping that some of the legal costs will be resolved in the current year, so we have reduced those slightly in out years as well. So total expenditures in the current year on the unrestricted side are anticipated to be 6.2 million, 6.3 million in 23-24, and 6.4, almost 6.45 in 24-25. Next slide. As Dr. Ramirez mentioned, really we've worked hard on looking at this budget, working to make sure that we do meet our reserves. We feel comfortable with where we're at in the current year and next year. 24-25 is our best guess. Our hope is that we'll be able to increase enrollment. We'll benefit from the augmentation of the TK program. But again, we were very conservative on our estimates. That's just my nature. I think the board knows that each year, sometimes I'm called Debbie Downer just because of my conservative nature, but I would much rather be conservative than overestimate. My motto is always to underestimate revenues and overestimate expenditures. So that always is helpful when it comes to that third year. So when we look in the current year, we have about 15.5% in reserves, which is well above the 5% or the 4% that's required statutorily. 23-24, we're at 13.93. Again, well above the 4% required reserve. And then in 24-25, it's almost 9% in reserves. So again, we're anticipating that in 24-25, we will meet those statutory requirements and have sufficient reserves. Are there any, one more slide, please? That being said, in the general fund, when we look to our other funds, our cafeteria fund, we have some deficit spending in the current year. That was by design. We have too much cash on hand in that program. We're only allowed to have 6 months operating cash. And we do a calculation each year. And so we've been required by the CDE to do a spend down. So that's why we're seeing that deficit spending, and actually having to pay more park for services has helped in that regard as well. Deferred maintenance, interest revenues estimated at $3,060. I anticipate that to be much higher. We were very conservative at second interim. We only have about a quarter and a half estimates. As you know, all of our monies are invested in the county treasury, and so it takes a bit of time to receive those updates and so we've received all of quarter one and half of quarter two. So we were very conservative in those estimates. So we anticipate to have in Fund 14, $600,000. Pupil Transportation Fund, we're anticipating $55,000. We have two special reserve funds in Fund 17, one which has about $54,000 and another that has a little over $11,000. Our building fund has about $3.6 million. And then our capital facilities fund, we have $105,000. And then we still have that county schools facility hardship monies sitting in Fund 35, and that's about $56,000. And then in our bond interest and redemption funds, we have approximately about over $1 million in those three funds, but that is can only be used for debt service. Are there any questions?
That's a lot of information, Tammy. Thank you very much. A lot of numbers.
Pleasure.
Any comments or questions?
I don't have questions on the slides that were presented, but I just wanted to confirm, like normal, there's several things in the second interim report that talk about items not being met. I know some of them are absolutely standard, just based on our school size and other programs. Are there any that you'd like to highlight that are currently marked as not met?
No, those. So to be perfectly honest, the criterion and standards are, I have to tease in my office, charter schools are not required to do criterion and standards, only school districts. And so I have a director and I always tease him because he doesn't have to do the criterion and standards. And I have to do 6 because I do all of the district budgets as well as BSA. And BSA as a JPA also has criterion and standards. For the most part, we're meeting all the marks. Sometimes it's difficult because they're using ratios, and COVID really caused things to be skewed, and all of the one-time monies also did as well. So some of that information, even though it's saying we're not meeting that, a lot of it has to do with that one-time money and the infusion, for example, of $1.7 million of state revenue, those types of things that really are out of our control as a district.
I appreciate how you underestimate and overestimate some areas. So that's good. Thank you for that.
Tammy, can I just offer up a comment? And you may want to speak to this, but you had mentioned our costs around running special education programs and special education programming, because that may factor into some of the point that Mrs. Dryden made. I did want to just illustrate that when it comes to the continuum of special needs, in part because we're a small district, we actually, there's programming that we do not have here on site with whom we have to partner with neighboring districts, among small school districts, and with the County Office of Education. And that is something that I wanted to highlight because, caring for, educating our children that are the most vulnerable, oftentimes that require the most attention. Unfortunately, we're not funded in a matter commensurate with the need, and it's a very difficult challenge to breach. It's a very difficult challenge to adjust to, and it is one that has unfortunately a fiscal reality for us. And so it's in situations like this that I want to represent that we don't have a full continuum of programming here, particularly in special education. So I don't know, Tammy, if that is related to the points that you were making, because in addition to one-time funding, we have to acknowledge that there are very real expenses that the district has to abide by virtue of the fact that our programming is not complete on site.
Well, and it's something that districts struggle with because not just small school districts, but large districts as well, because we're required to provide special education services from before students even enter. So there are additional dollars for those that are 0 to 2, but those that are between that, in that preschool range, they're left to districts. And even the larger districts, because of the specialized nature of the services required, we're very, very dependent on the county programs. And because they're in Mesa's case, you may only have one that may have a particular diagnosis. And so to be able to provide those specialized services would be cost prohibitive because one, space, healthcare needs. And again, it's not something just that small districts grapple with. Big districts are grappling with the exact same situations. Many times our schools aren't designed for the healthcare model. And that's why we're very, very dependent on the county programs, because they do have many of those specialized services and are able to provide for those specialized needs that a district cannot.
Okay. I have a question. Suppose a student attends all school days. What is the maximum amount of money that we get for a student that attends every single day that we have?
It's a little over $10,000. I can tell you the exact amount if you'll bear with me just one moment. That's the advantage of having my computer right at hand. You have to consider, in comparison to other districts, Mesa is very middle of the road when you look to our unduplicated pupil count percentage. There are districts that are close to 100%. And so for every percent over 55%, they're getting concentration dollars. But we're not eligible for concentration. But second interim based upon our current unduplicated pupil count. It's just loading. In 22-23, we're estimating the LCFF entitlement per ADA to be $10,718.
Thank you. So the bottom line, our revenue is healthy. Is that correct?
The relationship to revenue and expenditures, we are seeing some deficit spending that was by design because of one-time dollars, but some of the recommendations that are made in the further along in the agenda will help to correct that. And one of the things that you have to be careful of is, as you look to right size a district, is that you don't overcorrect too early on, because that can cause other programmatic issues. And so we're taking the necessary steps to ensure that the district meets its reserve out in year 3, but looking more to the immediate needs for 23-24.
Okay, thank you. Anything further?
Yeah, I have another question here, a couple of questions, and it has to do with projections. One of which is, in order to create the budget properly, we need to have proper projections for attendance and enrollment. We had a significant decline in enrollment pre-COVID. From pre-COVID to present day, we were at about 626. We're now at 576. And it's projected that statewide that there's a declining enrollment. We've had for roughly 400,000 people leave the state over the last 5 years. And that projection is continuing as well. And, you know, part of this going 3 years out is kind of pie in the sky and, you know, pick a number out of the sky. But to be conservative, we need to accurately project how many students we're going to have. And so having appropriate analyses as to what's going on in the real world. As a result of COVID, we also lost a number of students to private schools for various reasons. And we're also losing a significant number of students as they transition from elementary to junior high. And one of the things I'm very interested in is how many students overall, what percentage of students that we're losing as they transition from elementary to junior high, and are the projections for enrollment year after year accurate, or do we need to reduce them down a little bit so that we're a little more in line with what's going on, so that we're not seeing significant reductions in deficit spending?
So to answer your question, fifth grade is a very pivotal year for us. I can tell you that from last year's cohort to this year, in other words, last year's fifth into this year's sixth, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think we held well over 90% of our students. And I think that there's a great level of intentionality that went into that. One other thing that we have tried and attempted to do with some mixed success is request an intent to return. That's something that's relatively new to Mesa, but it is a way of gathering information in a more formal way about whether families intend to return for the subsequent year. That said, our efforts really are more targeted toward onboarding. You know, you heard me indicate the middle school showcase and the purpose behind that. That I think is in part a way of assisting our families and also encouraging them to continue to think of Mesa as an option. There's a lot that we offer. There's a tremendous amount that we offer. We can't be a large comprehensive middle school. I'm not intending to be. I think it's about really doubling down on our strengths and ensuring that a small school environment where students are being cared for, but challenged and accelerated academically is something that that I'd like to really put out as a vision for our middle school. I think we have for a lot extracurricularly in terms of events, participation, opportunities. And I think it's just a matter of continuing to outreach primarily to our families here, but also some of our families who have yet to, discover us, if you will. So the projections that we offered up in this particular report, I think, are accurate to our current information. And I look at last year's efforts as being really solidly allowing us to retain the bulk. And like I said, over 90% of our students return to us from fifth to sixth. If we hold that pattern, then I think we're going to be in a very competitive position.
We also historically have had this bubble in 7th and 8th grade, and we're actually graduating a very small 8th grade class. And that has consistently been a very small class historically. And we've always struggled with that bubble as it moved from grade to grade. That will age out in the current year. And then 7th grade currently is 51. We're anticipating it to potentially slightly grow next year to 53. But then in the younger cohorts, we're seeing consistent grade size between 64 to 68 in grade, with the exception of our K class, which is much smaller. So it will be interesting to see as TKK materializes, how those numbers will move through the grade levels and the cohorts. But when we compare ourselves to neighboring districts that have seen declines upward of 20%, we've only seen a decrease of about 10%. So I think that speaks well of Mesa's programs and our retention of students.
Thank you. And you did answer a question about the current 8th grade class. I understand that it's a very small class, but it has consistently been small ever since they were in TK, maybe not TK, but kindergarten, etc. So thank you for that. I'm a big believer of making happy those who are near and those who are far will come. So hopefully we continue to improve our program so that, our own families tell other families about Mesa, and they come because of a referral and not so much because there's an advertisement. So, all right, anything further? Okay, moving on.
We need to vote on.
Okay, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Everybody voted in favor?
That is correct.
The motion carries 4-0, no opposition. Okay. Is there a motion for the consideration of acceptance of certification of the 2021-2022 annual report of audit of financial statements and supplementary information for fiscal year ending in June 30, 2022?
Make
so
a
moved.
motion. I'll second Mr. Sullivan's motion.
Thank you. Al.
Is there any discussion?
No, I muted myself. I just wanted to point out there was a typo about the dates in the report. It does talk about it being for a certain time period in various spots. There's just a typo in one. But obviously it means for the through the June time period. So I just wanted to point it out because we're aware of it, but it's very clear throughout the document the time period covered.
Anything further? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0, no opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of acceptance of Proposition 39, General Obligation Funds, Measure O Performance Audit for fiscal year ending in June 30, 2022?
Make a motion that we accept the Proposition 39 General Obligation Bond Measure O Performance Audit for fiscal year ending June 30, 2022.
Is there a
I'll
second?
that motion.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0, no opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the 2022-2023 transportation plan?
I move that we approve the 2022-2023 transportation plan.
Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion?
Yes, Mrs. Romero, just wanted to indicate that here again, this is a new plan that was put forward by the state. Mrs. Peterson would know better as to what the reason is, but so I'll save some commentary there. Except I will say that we have certainly transportation has been an area in which I've spent a lot of time over the last 3 years, and we've on the whole made some pretty good improvements on that. Our vehicles are in good working order. Our drivers are really excellent, an excellent set of individuals, are really knowledgeable, caring, know this community well. And our goal has always been to remove barriers for students to attend school. We try to remain as flexible as we can to families and students. And I think that's one of the advantages of being a small school district. That said, we always continue to look to improve. And wherever we have to, or situations call for, we do have partners that we've been able to call upon to support specific student scenarios or family situations where hardships or other extenuating circumstances surface. So anyhow, I just wanted to offer those thoughts as the board looks to approve this plan.
And just to
I
give,
have questions about the transportation in general, because we have to offer it for our in-district and then in need for certain populations. I'm wondering if we also publicize it, or, I mean, it doesn't seem like we do for a lot of the in-district families, that it could be along their route, and especially with so many parents that complain about drop off and pick up, there is another option, which is transportation. And I do know, at least at my bus stop, you know, we've even had some newer kids join us at my bus stop, and their, you know, their parents are driving them because they're not necessarily on my street. I don't know where they live, but they're coming to my bus stop and joining in. And so if that's an option for others, I think it might be something to look into for the next school year, is offering, because if you don't have to come to the school to pick up your child, if you're in district, they can use our transportation services. And this is one element I feel that not all school districts seem to offer or have as much. When I talk to a lot of other people in other school districts, they claim they don't even have buses. I know they must, because they must be able to provide transportation to students, but they're not even aware that's an option. So I'm wondering how many of our families aren't aware that that's an option.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And I think as we look to anticipate the needs for next year, maybe we need to just cast a wider net. My only sensitivity sometimes is to perhaps not promote it in such a way that maybe some more out of district families might get confused about that. But with that said, I think our in-district families, we can certainly revisit and maybe make a more concerted effort to outreach to our in-district families. I know that as we come upon them during the course of the year, it is something that's part of the enrollment packet, right? And that we try to publicize and and part of the reason that we make ourselves flexible, there are families that approach us about riding the bus on certain days and certain occasions and things of that nature. We try to be as flexible as we can. It's not always easy because it's difficult to balance safety, knowing who's on the bus and maintaining all those records right. But wherever we can, we try to be very flexible. So I think we will make a more concerted push as we have in the past, but maybe just revisiting with our district families and see if that's an option they want to exercise.
And just to give a quick background, why we're
I have a quick
required.
question about this. And it has to do with it. When we look down at the bottom, it looks like we're doing this approval after the fact rather than in advance of the fact. That we're trying to meet a deadline to approve this transportation plan. It's for 22-23 school year. Is this something that should be on the governance program, so that again we're approving this more towards the beginning of the year rather than at the latter part of the year and trying to meet a deadline?
No, this is just meeting the statutory requirement. This is a very, as Dr. Ramirez mentioned, this is a brand new plan that was released. It just became available, and that's why it's being brought to you now. And basically what it is, if there is adequate funds within the budget, then the intent is to reimburse school districts for the additional costs for their transportation. As you note that there's that transportation add-on amount from the LCFF calculator of $69,000. As part of LCFF, there's been this add-on for transportation, but it has not been, that is one component that has not increased by COLA. And so the intent by the legislature, because transportation has become a greater and greater burden on district's budget, it's to increase that add-on by COLA each year, and then also then to reimburse district's total expenditures up to 60%, and that's what you were eligible for. But in order to be eligible, we have to approve this plan, and so that's why it's being brought before you tonight. It's not something that, this is a very new plan, and we're not even certain how it's going to roll forward year to year. It's just something that the legislature tacked down. We've had a myriad of plans, and this is just another one that governing boards are being required to approve.
Yeah, and just to answer your question, Mr. Sullivan, if this does become a statutory requirement, certainly early in the year or at the conclusion of a school year, anticipating the following is really the best way to plan ahead, right? So we'll certainly keep an eye out for this one.
Well, I appreciate what Ms. Peterson said with regards to the plan is that had we done this early, we wouldn't know what the additional costs for reimbursement that we could get. And so I see this tightrope, and, you know, it's a new plan. I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how does it fit into the governance thing? And it's still kind of early to tell. And had we done this, wasn't even available back in September. I don't know.
No, it
But,
was not.
And so that being the case, you know, I just looked at this, you know, with the information that we're given. Okay, here's something that, you know, we're trying to meet a deadline. I get that. Now that because we're passing it now, we're going to be able to recoup some funds, at least this go around. And so how
We hope. There are
don't
no
know.
guarantees that we'll
There's no
recoup those
guarantee.
funds.
Always with this thing.
That's why
Anyway,
we're checking this box, just to make sure.
Gotcha. So, and we don't know what it's going to look like going forward.
No. And in the future, if it mirrors this plan, we have this information when we close the books with unaudited actuals. So it will be very easy to bring back in September or October, once we close our books.
Thank you very much, both of you.
All right, anything further? Okay, moving on, I'm sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0, no opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the resolution 22-23-06 state funds application?
I move to approve the resolution 22-23-06 for state fund application.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion?
Actually, I would like to just indicate that on background, the board received information pertaining to the need for this resolution. I'm very thankful to Mr. Turner, prior superintendent, who back in 2019 moved ahead in that partnership with SchoolWorks, thinking ahead to the bond and the expenditures that would follow to be able to move forward with that application. Then it has taken us till now for us to be able to come to this point, but this is one of the statutory requirements in order to complete the application process, and we are projecting. Tammy can assert this, but in our conversations, we are projected entitlement and reimbursable funds might be 1.8 to 1.9 million dollars, and that is based on projects already completed that fall in line with the criteria that the state has set forward. And why it's so important is because we project another 3, perhaps 4-year horizon. And we want to make sure that our application is in immediately so that we are assuring ourselves that funding down the line. So I'm thankful to the board and certainly thankful to Ms. Peterson and BSA, and of course the partnership with SchoolWorks, who's helped us work this application.
Thank you. No, I agree. I think that's a healthy reimbursement amount, so that's great. Anything further?
And just one quick question. This is a lengthy process that we've been involved with. Just as a reminder to everyone, should such a reimbursement come, where will those funds go? Will they be back to the bond? Will they be into the general fund, or is it categorized in some way?
They'll go into a state facilities fund. And then we'll be able to use those for further improvements.
Anything
And so they
further?
would be categorized?
They won't go back to the general fund. They'll go into a separate fund.
Thank you.
Anything further? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. No opposition. All right. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the contract amendments from 19-6 Architects for the following projects: HVAC and window replacement?
Make a motion to approve the contract amendments from 19-6 Architects for the HVAC and window replacement project.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Jamie seconded.
Any discussion? Nobody wants to say anything about this? I have a question.
I mean, I was gonna say, the cost is just for the most recent HVAC and window that came up, more recently in 2023,
Yes,
that weren't accounted for in the other list of things we've approved.
correct. In prior meetings, the board has approved projects that always needed to go back to architects to be able to either revise plans or gather more input from the architects around the original designs and scope of work.
Dr. Ramirez, you also mentioned that the bidding charge has to do with something along the lines of the architects having to charge for others to bid.
Yeah, so let me clarify, because that came up as an additional question from Mrs. Romero. And so it's a good opportunity to bring the entire board into this conversation. So there is, not on this amendment, but in the original contract, there is a line, an itemized expenditure that indicates bidding. And in my clarification with Mrs. Peterson, this is not to bill back the cost of their bidding process, but rather the work and effort that it requires to prepare those plans to specs, so that contractors, in order to help us in the bidding process, as we went out to bid, contractors to have clarity about what it was that needed to be, well, the scope of the project, the specifics of the project, and that's what that cost entailed. Not reflected currently. It was what the board had approved some time ago. It's not part of this amendment. I just want to clarify that, but it is part of the original scope of work. And I wanted to just clarify that for everybody.
So just to clarify, the bidding charge of the 4,000, roughly 4,000 in the HVAC document has nothing to do with the architects charging us for them bidding and getting us to hire them, correct?
That's correct.
That is correct. It has to do with their preparation and helping us as a district go out to bid and having all the plans up to spec for the contractors to be able to then go through the bidding process.
Okay. And with regards to the cost, the 21,450, is that for the HVAC? Is that a number that was negotiated with the architects at all? Or was it something that we accepted from the get-go?
Just to summarize, the scope of the work is itemized in what goes into that 21,000 is listed there in the document. So maybe you can just bring that up, Mrs. Torres. As far as the negotiation of it, I know that Mr. De Leon was working with 19.6 specifically on these pieces as it related to, it was influenced by what DSA had indicated, where the Department of State Architects had indicated was the modifications that needed to be made to the actual building. So was it negotiated? I can't say from my standpoint. I didn't negotiate with them directly, but I know that Mr. De Leon, in collaboration with us, did represent what the scope of work would entail. So I don't know, Ms. Peterson, if you have any.
Is this, are we referencing the increase in cost in the amendment or the total costs that?
No, the
in the
increase in
agreement?
cost, the amendment fixed fee, and how we arrived at 21,450.
We evaluated based upon the number of hours required and based upon their billable rate. And so that, and
Right, so that billable rate is not itemized here, but obviously it does factor into the total cost.
Right, I'm just trying to figure out, when we get these larger proposals for amendments, for example, this one, how much do we negotiate the price down? I always saw my father negotiating everything down to the last penny. And so I get this, I have this, and, this background of just negotiating and rather than just accepting.
Yeah. So let me,
We challenge, we challenge.
yeah, let me let me put your mind at ease. All of these expenditures are very carefully scrutinized, and having worked with Mr. De Leon since prior to his full-time arrival, and Dave Norris before that. Let's not forget Dave's contributions to all this. They are very scrutinizing of all of these additional efforts. And this particular document does not reflect that the way that other prior documents did, as far as what the original proposal was and what the agreement was. There you could more clearly see it. But I can just tell you it's with the same kind of spirit that we work with the architects, obviously in a different scope and line than the contractors. But I can tell you that both Ms. Peterson and Mr. De Leon are pretty scrutinizing when it comes to those efforts. Not just that though, but Mr. De Leon by trade is actually an architect. So this is a space that he's very, very knowledgeable in.
All right, thank you. Anything further? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0, no opposition. Okay, is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the 2023-2024 SELPA service agreements listed under item I?
I move that we approve the 2023-2024 SELPA services agreement as listed.
Is there a second? Okay, any discussion? No discussion?
I guess I just wanted to clarify because there's a lot of different services and to specialists, and there's different amounts associated with all those. And so I assume that those amounts were based on the level of effort we're currently needing or what we are projecting on needing.
So we use this year's calculations as a baseline for the following. So in fact, it's both. We take, in particular, adaptive PE, deaf and hard of hearing, physical therapy, and OT are all services that are exclusive to students with special needs. The one that is both for students with special needs as well as our general education population is the social, emotional, and behavioral services. That is a decline, or we're projecting phasing down services in anticipation and instill in conversation around fielding a counselor position in-house. Those are all projections based on this year's information and the actual services that are prescribed within plans and that we're currently in need of. So we're projecting out for sure, but I think it is a pretty accurate projection based on the numbers that we have this year.
And because we haven't seen a lot of fluctuation in the past.
Well, yes, we know the number of minutes that every plan prescribes. We factor that out by the number of students, and we come up with ratios of hours per week that then give us some flexibility, because not all weeks are the same, not all months are the same. So what we want to do is stay within those thresholds of cost, assuming that our enrollment and need for these programs stays consistent.
Anything further? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0, no opposition. The next item, I am going to, I'm going to abstain or exclude myself from making this motion. Perhaps Jamie can go ahead and take on item J, just because I understand the circumstances surrounding it, and I understand the reasons. I'm totally aware, but one of the teachers was my daughter's teacher, so I rather exclude myself from this item. So why don't you go ahead, Jamie, and take on this one?
Well, you just won't vote. So you can still ask for a motion.
Yeah, but you can make the motion if you don't mind.
Okay, so then can I get a motion to consider the adoption of resolution 22-2307, the temporary employee notice of release?
I'll make a motion to consider the adoption of resolution 22-23-07, temporary employee notice release.
I'll second the motion.
Dr. Ramirez, would you like to give any comments?
Yes, so going back to the conversation we had around the budget, most of our expenditures and district is really revolves around people, our individuals, our workforce, our staff. And as we project out into a new year, this is a period of time in which this notice would allow us to be able to either release these employees at the end of the school year or reassign them to another role. So at this point, this is a statutory requirement that those declarations happen on or before March 15th. There's a lot still to be determined, and whether it's enrollment or budget, whatever it may be, that will factor into the decisions. But I feel like our employees have been fantastic. Every single one of them on these items has proven to be a valuable member of our team. And we just want to make sure that they are availed of every opportunity to continue their livelihood, ideally here at Mesa as part of our family. But in the event that that's not what they wish or what the circumstances call for, that there's an opportunity, ample opportunity for them to land in the best place possible. So it's very difficult. There's no doubt about that. But there's always, some guarded optimism that we may be able to retain some of our staff as well. So if there are any questions, I'm certainly available to answer.
Okay.
If I can make a comment or two about this. Number one, Ms. Romero, I don't know that you need to necessarily recuse yourself. You want to choose to abstain, that's fine, but there's no names involved in this whatsoever. Number two, this is a housekeeping thing that needs to be done on a regular basis, on an annual basis, where teachers are put on notice, temporary teachers, because there's an uncertainty in the budget. We are required to do certain things in order to do our fiduciary responsibility to the school district. And it's nothing personal that's about this. And if you choose to abstain, that's fine, but I don't think you need to recuse yourself from being a part of this, because it's not like a conflict of interest. We put all teachers on notice that they may be released. It's not a requirement they are released, but they may be released. And the district may act upon that or not act upon that. Some of them may stay, some may not. We just don't know. Time will tell. Oftentimes we're required by law to notice by March 15th who we're going to release in accordance to keep the district budget sound. And as we learn things, as you'll know, we've got first and second interim reports, third interim, we've got finals, we've got all these different reports, and things change. And things may change between now and the beginning of the school year that says, oh, we got plenty of funds to manage that, and we take everybody back. Or it just gives us an option. It doesn't say these people are definitely let go. And likely that'll be the case, or it may not be. But it just gives leverage to the school district to say that in order to keep the budget sound, we're going to do these things. And this may come up on an annual basis. For years and years and years, we had two teachers. Our art teacher, I couldn't believe we had to put her on notice every year for about 10 years that her position, that she was going to be released. And we hired her back every fall. And I don't know that she was ever notified, but what I'm saying is that our responsibility as a board member is to make sure that the budget is sound. And whether or not these people are actually let go may or may not happen, we don't know. But it's also possible that they'll all be hired back. And so this is something that we need to do as board members.
Okay, then we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those that abstain?
Aye.
And there is no opposition. So that passes.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. Ms. Dryden. All right, is there a motion for the consideration of adoption of Resolution 2223-08?
I move that we adopt resolution.
I was not done. 1 second.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Let me repeat. Let me start over. Is there a motion for the consideration of adoption of Resolution 22-23-08 to reduce or eliminate classified services?
I move that we adopt resolution 22-23-08 to reduce or eliminate classified services.
Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion?
I just wanted to make one point about this, and that is that this statutory requirement of matching certificated and classified to March 15th is only 2 years in. I don't often editorialize, but I think this is by far one of the most difficult pieces to be in compliance around, because our classified work calendar, our workflow is dramatically different from our certificate. And so in my opinion, it has put us in a position where we need to over notify as a district. I'm very much frustrated by this particular law, and I understand at its core what it's trying to accomplish, but it is fundamentally, to me, unfair to have to notice people this early in the classified space, because their job function is very different than and cycles very differently than certificated. So anyhow, that was just my editorial, but beyond that, echo the sentiments that I voiced earlier about just the challenge with making sure that we're notifying our employees, and then making sure that we are able to land them in a place either here or elsewhere where their livelihood can continue.
Anything further? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. No opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of approval of the field trip request to University of California, Santa Barbara?
I move that we approve the field trip request to the University of California, Santa Barbara.
Is there
I
a
will
second?
second.
Okay.
And
Any
Mrs. I'd actually like to pull this item since it's going to have to be rescheduled anyhow.
I was gonna say, I was just gonna amend that, but you can't because we don't know the date.
But we're looking to reschedule since it was supposed to happen today.
When was it supposed to happen?
Today.
Today. Oh, got it. Okay. Is this for middle school kids?
8th grade.
Great, okay.
It's a great opportunity to tour and visit UCSB, but obviously conditions did not allow. So we're looking for a schedule. Hopefully it's gonna come together for us.
Okay. All in favor?
Before we go on to the vote, is it possible to go ahead and approve the field trip?
To approve the funds of the field trip?
If the board so moves, yes, you can approve the date to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I would like to do
it's
that.
for the date to be determined, right?
Yes, you just have to make that motion.
You want me to withdraw that motion and make the motion again for a TBD date?
No, let's just amend the motion. Trustee Dryden was about to make that motion within this motion.
Right. So I was gonna move to approve the opportunity of this field trip and the transportation required for this school year, 2022 to 2023.
Okay.
I'll second that one.
There's no further discussion, I suppose. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. No opposition. Is there a motion for the consideration of adoption of the December 2022 CSBA board policy revisions for the sections listed?
Ms. Romero,
Yeah.
Yes.
Been reading it.
that was just part one of what happened. What we just did is we amended the motion for the date of the previous motion. So we all approved of changing the language for the date to be for the school year 2022, 2023. And now we need to vote on approving the field trip as
Okay,
it's
I'm sorry,
amended.
I thought I had moved already. Sorry. Okay, all in favor?
Of approving the field trip, aye.
Yes, right, for item I. So the motion carries 4-0, no opposition. All right, moving on. Is there a motion for the consideration of adoption of the December 2022 CSBA board policy revisions for the sections listed under item M?
I move to adopt as presented or amended.
Okay. Any discussion?
So
These
they,
had options.
several of them have options. So I don't know, Sandra, if you want to lead that discussion or.
Sure. I did notice that, let's see, it's just starting with the BP 5148.2, I think the recommendation for option 2 is fair, which is to charge possibly, we don't have to, but possibly a nominal family fee for after-school programs if it comes to it. And then board bylaw 9220 has 4 sections. So it has four sections. That means 2 options in each section. If I remember correctly, option number 1, or the first option would be option number 1 because we've already moved from an at-large to an election by trustee area. The next option would, I believe, would be option number 2 because it basically limits, it doesn't limit, but the maximum amount of words that a candidate can include in a statement for election is 400 words as opposed to a smaller number. I think it was close to about 200. So option number 2 allows the candidate, if the candidate decides to file a statement, to include up to 400 words. And the following option is probably option number 2, allowing or having the candidate and not the district pay for the statement, which is roughly about, if I remember correctly, I think it was about $600 or $800. So let the candidate pay the statement and not the district. And the last one is, it has to do with when a candidate runs for election and there's a tie. That one actually has 3 options. And the first one is by lot, if I remember correctly. By lot is basically saying that we are going to select who wins. And option number 2 is having them run off. But then option number 3 allows us to decide later, do we want to have a runoff, or do we want them to have or do we want to have it by line? Essentially us selecting who wins in the event there's a tie. And the possibilities of something like that happening, are so slim. So I would say option number 3, if it ever even comes to it. But those are the ones that I noticed. Anything further?
So Sandra, I apologize. I missed some of that because I was replugging my computer in. I guess I agree. I also like for the after school program option B, and the same for the election process under 9220 for option 1, because it's how we chose to move forward as a trustee area. For a statement of qualifications, I don't know how everybody felt about how many words we want to give or not. That part doesn't bother me. The third one, however, I didn't hear what you were suggesting, but for the consideration regarding the payment for the candidate statement, my question was, what does the district currently do? Does the district currently pay for that or does not? Because I would rather we didn't. Like it should be by candidate.
The does not cover costs incurred by candidates. The only thing that I would offer up when it comes to that, and I did express in writing in front of you, my thoughts or consideration. There is a cost incurred to becoming a trustee. And so I leave it to you to go through this process, but my thought is that provided the nominal fee, that it is that we as a district try to remove, and I will show one. For as long as this issue has been, and probably for the future, finding, recruiting, and retaining board members will be a challenge, particularly by trustee area. Wherever the district can absorb an appropriate nominal fee in exchange for somebody's time and commitment, I think that it's something the board ought to consider. Because it sometimes becomes, now there's other ways to become trustee, to be sure. So that's perfectly suitable discussion. But if the district can incur a minimal cost in exchange for the commitment of an individual, then I think it's a cost well spent. So, but
I would like to, yeah, I go ahead. I'm sorry. You were breaking off a little bit, Raul. So if I understood you correctly, you are proposing that the district pay for the cost, which is about $600 or $800 for the candidate to include a statement on the ballot.
correct, because some of these costs mount up, and there are costs that the candidate is intending to run. Oftentimes, it's individuals that are doing it for a different set of reasons than other elected offices, and not have the advantage of being able to or the opportunity to pay those costs, especially up front. So I'm just sharing with my idea. Ultimately, it's a board decision. But looking at it from my perspective and wanting to maintain stability and coherence in the board, I think whatever we can do within reason to be able to bring down the barriers we might experience to becoming a board member, particularly since the pool has shrunk to trustee areas. There are very concentrated communities now, and I think it's important forward.
Well, and I don't know if anybody else has done a statement, but I haven't, and therefore I've never incurred a cost to run for this board position. And so it's up to the candidate if you choose to do a written statement, because it often depends on if you're running up against somebody or not.
Oftentimes there would be a name
And so I don't know if anybody else has written a statement.
Right.
but
No, I had the option and I decided not to because it just didn't make sense because we're such a small district. And but if there was a cost associated, I think that the right thing for me to do would for me to pay out of pocket. I understand what you're saying, Dr. Ramirez, but like Ms. Dryden said, the probabilities of a candidate being contested here are slim, and if a candidate is contested, then let them run. I'm not fully in support of having to pay for an $600 fee, especially if it's only one candidate who's going to run unopposed. And but I'm not too sure if Mrs. Hupp included a statement. I don't believe that she did.
Well, I think the theory or the thought here is it hasn't really happened before, and we just want to remove any barriers to anybody who might want
So the board decides a process by which a lot is a representation of the sampling of the community. So I'll tell you in part why I added my consideration there is because I see how strained the board is to come up with processes. The likelihood of a runoff is very, very minimal. But with that said, yes, it would be a cost incurred to the district, no doubt. But bear in mind that while the lot system does not require a cost, it does require a commitment to be able to then field the process. And that process would have to be incurred by the board. So that was just my thinking on that as a recommendation passed along to the trustees, to all of you.
I would like to say a few things about what we've discussed. Number one has to do with the statement. I have written a statement in the past and paid for that statement. And since I ran unopposed, I was reimbursed for that statement. And so it wasn't a big deal. And oftentimes we have run unopposed. And I agree with that everyone should pay their own way to get here. However, we just went through a process to make voting districts, trustee areas, with a specific goal in mind to include a class of people that may not have the financial resources to fund such a thing. And so for that reason, I'm inclined to say that we should absorb that cost. Traditionally, we have not had multiple people run for areas. We've been at large and it's been a challenge, but I think that I'm in agreement with Dr. Ramirez that we should try to remove those barriers. It doesn't mean you can't pay the cost if you want to. It doesn't mean that at all. But my bigger concern is how do we encourage people to participate in running for these different positions? Hence, I would encourage, it's a small amount of money when you look at the big scheme of things. If we're talking, 3 candidates and at $1,800 versus what did we just see, like a $9 million budget, it's kind of insignificant. And somebody should be capable, but if somebody's willing to serve, and especially with the new trustee areas that we've created, we should encourage that, and not to be inclusive and not exclusive. So my thoughts and opinions are that we should adopt the option that the district would pick up that cost. Normally, I would say, no, let them pay their own way. But because we made the new trustee areas, that shifts the way that I think.
But wouldn't a candidate have to campaign if they're being opposed to? I mean, don't they have to raise money to campaign and hopefully get elected?
Maybe yes, maybe no. I've never campaigned. I've never raised any money.
Okay. So, let's see.
So I'm also in line with the 200 word. Option 1 for the statement of qualifications. I can be for option 1, paying for the candidate. I do think that gives a little bit more quality throughout the district, and it wouldn't mean to say that the district has to pay, but they are willing to pay. So of course, if myself or anybody else on the board wanted to run and pay it for ourselves to do a statement, we could. It wouldn't prohibit that. And as Trustee Sullivan was saying, if you go unopposed, they refund you it anyways, right? So I'm okay with that, but I do think option 3 makes the sense for the ties, because all that does is you get to choose before that election, if there is a runoff, do you want to do by lot or do you want to do re-election? And that gives you flexibility to kick that can down the road.
Okay. Is anybody else talking? I'm not too sure that I hear anybody else saying it, having to say anything further. So if I understand it correctly, for the first section, that's option 1, because we've moved from at-large to by trustee area. And for the second section is option number 2, because it allows the candidate only to include 200 words as opposed to 400.
Option 2 is 200, no, option 2 is 400 words. I thought option 1 was 200.
So you're saying 400 words or 200 words?
200 words.
So that would be option number 1. (200 words as opposed to 400, which is option number 1. And option number 3.
And then option number 1 for the third, which would be the district paying for the candidate statement.
So regardless of the number of candidates that run for office,
I think so.
so that would be option number 1. And then, did I hear you guys say option number 3 for this, the fourth section, which is either by lot or runoff?
Yeah, that's what we were thinking.
Okay. All right, so anything further? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
I vote aye. Jamie votes aye.
Motion
Okay.
carries 4-0.
As amended.
As amended. No opposition. Okay. Okay, and just item for future consideration is LCAP. And the next meeting is Tuesday, April 18th at 6 p.m.
Without special board workshop, it's item B.
So Mrs. Romero and I just talked about this. It doesn't need to be something discussed thoroughly now, but just the consideration of a different start time or a different time and date altogether to discuss some very specific and agreed upon topics that are of interest to the board. I heard board goals as being one of those. I have to feel more information around whether that's something that the board would wish to see separate. We have traditionally done, since I've been to board workshops and perhaps before that, special board workshops on like a Saturday morning. I don't know if that's of interest to the board before the year lets out, or whether that's of interest in extending budgeting time around start time. But as I understand, at least 2 trustees may not have availability prior to 6. So that's all this item was intended to propose.
I mean, I like the idea for information and discussion. We can go exactly through those things. Right, and then decide how we'd like to do them.
Bring it back for information and discussion.
Right. So that way we can discuss what works best for us, because we've also done special board meetings where it's just a different day of the week. So it doesn't have to be a Saturday or earlier or later. It can just be another day.
And along those lines, perhaps if we came back to the next board meeting with some post dates, because one of the things for certain we want to talk about is board goals for the coming year, and another option might be bond money and how those funds are. Yeah,
Okay,
but I
so-
think the goals should be a separate item.
Right, I think that if we add more than 2 items, especially like the heavier ones, the goals and the Measure O, the use of Measure O funds, I think that's really going to take up at least 25, maybe 30 minutes. So perhaps pick one or the other to incorporate into the agenda as a discussion, and then perhaps then have a special board workshop, kind of as a follow.
Mrs. Romero, what I'd like to do is then bring it back under information next and in the April meeting. And maybe you and I can talk a little bit about how to start chipping away at those topics, because they're very related but discrete from one another. So we will bring back special board workshops and maybe some consideration of dates for April, or in April's meeting for a date after April. And then I will provide an overview of Measure O that will start the conversation, because it's important for you to just see where the finances land. You saw some of the money reflected in our second interim, but I think diving into that as an overview, what's been spent, what's been allocated, is going to be informative, so that the board can start formulating ideas based on concrete numbers and not, well, just on reality and concrete numbers and balances.
Well, and I think you've been narratively doing that in your weekly memos to us. So then it could also just be adding more detail to that, because narratively you have been discussing those items, just not in that detail.
All right, anything further for the moment? All right, we adjourn at 9:05. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.